Share, yeah.
Share.
God, we thank you. Breathe on us now. Amen.
Please, Jesus.
Thank you.
Please, God. Please do.
Thank you.
Yes, God. Wow. Okay. You got that? So, okay. So, I think once you, Tyranny, give us just a nod or a heads up, just put "let's go" in the chat, and we'll get ready to go. But we see that there's someone that's coming. We want to welcome you. Those of you who are coming on, we're live. Let's go. So that is what Dr. Bridgman always tells us. Now we got two Dr. Bridgmans on today. Those
No, remember, I'm Reverend
Let's
Bridgman.
go. So yes, that is what Dr. Bridgman always. So, so we're grateful, as she would say, let's go. So welcome to you all who are coming on, preachers that are there, those practitioners that are joining us. We appreciate you and we welcome you. It is my honor. My name is Dion Boissiere. I am the proud board chair of Women Preach Incorporated. And we are here together with one of our board members and one of our original board members. Both of them are joining us today to be our conversation partners. So if you have tuned in and you are here with mental health, trauma, and preaching, you are in the right place. One of my clergy colleagues says, trauma comes up to breathe. And it has come up to breathe. Indeed, it has, with the rise of violence, the vicarious and otherwise. We called the Board of Women Preach, found that it was imperative because we are not addressing this properly, not from the pulpits, and also we're not referring to the practitioners. So we need to have a conversation about all of that. So this is why we are here. So Dr. Bridgman, please, would you introduce our conversation partners? We are excited about this because we need it, mind, body, and soul.
Yes. Hey, everybody. Thank you for those of you who signed up for the webinar. We really appreciate that you signed in for the intimate conversation. And for those who will be watching on Facebook, let me just say my cat is going to make his appearance here in a minute. I just want to warn everybody already. The two people who are going to help lead us in this conversation, to use their words, are both providers and consumers of mental health care. And so I am going to let them introduce themselves, but let me say we're going to have this conversation about mental health as somebody who has provided grief counseling, but also needed the kind of care for anxiety and for SAD, seasonal affective disorder. Myself, I know how important this is as someone who leads in the church, who has led in the church. And so I'm glad to introduce someone who I know intimately because she's my sister. That's not why she's here. She's here because she's great at what she does. But Reverend Pamela Bridgman, who is also a licensed clinical professional, and the Reverend Dr. Cedric Von Jackson, who adopted me as his mama. And so I'm gonna call him my son, and who is the pastor at Hunter Street, West Hunter Baptist Church, rather, in Atlanta, and who did his DMin around mental health care in the church. So Pamela and then Cedric, take it away.
I am Pamela Bridgman, a licensed clinical social worker and ordained minister. I also hold certifications as a certified master addictions counselor and a certified clinical trauma professional. I am an Air Force veteran. I own a Healing Journey Counseling and Consultation in Cartersville, Georgia, and I've been providing compassionate care since 1976.
And I am Cedric Vaughn Jackson. As Dr. Bridgman said, I am the pastor of West Hunter Street Baptist Church here in Atlanta. I finished my Doctor of Ministry in 2020, and my dissertation project was entitled Rethinking Mental Health in the African American Congregation Through Preaching, Teaching, and Hospitality. I am a 28-year educator. And again, I also sit on the board of Women Preach. And I try to find ways to incorporate conversations about mental health, mental illness, mental wellness into our programming at West Hunter and on different online platforms.
You know, Cedric, sort of like Valerie said, it's important for people to know that I come at this not only as a mental health care professional, but also as a consumer of mental health services. I have been managing, and notice I use the word managing. I always encourage people to avoid labeling themselves as I am bipolar, because that says that that's who you intrinsically are. And it absolutely isn't. It absolutely is not. So I manage bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, and have, as my sister, my biological sister, Valerie says, have been doing that for a long time and through my entire tenure as a minister of the gospel.
So I'm really glad to hear you use the language manage, because so much of the stigma that's attached to mental illness is perpetrated by the language that we use to talk about mental health concerns. And I think, you know, in particular, how we talk about suicide.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about committing suicide. People use the word committing suicide. And because we're not careful with that language, when we use words like commit suicide, then we equate suicide to something that is criminal. And then in the church, right, we take that a step further and layer this strange theology on top of that says, well, since you committed suicide, you also commit sins. So now suicide becomes the unforgivable sin and you're automatically condemned to hell. And the Bible never says that.
I was going to say, you and I both know, and every theologian sitting here knows that there's only one unforgivable sin identified in the Bible.
Absolutely.
And it isn't suicide.
Right.
And I'm
Although
not getting it.
It's very interesting because oftentimes people says, well, it has to be suicide because you can't be forgiven for that. And I'm like, right. I'm just saying right to what you're saying. That
you also can't be forgiven for that impure thought that you have as you're crossing the street and a bus hits you and takes you out.
Right. Exactly. It's a very, so I want to kind of direct us to talk about the language here. So Pamela, let's start
That's
with
where I was
some
going.
real good definitions. I want us to start with some real good definitions and then let's go from there.
Yeah,
So
I was
when
going
we
to
say-
that whole thing about language being extremely important, including the nuances of language. I ensure that I guide my patients around how they talk about themselves and how they talk about. So I want to just put some key concepts out here for you that I use as I'm talking about trauma-informed preaching and trauma-informed care. And the first is, notice I'm going to talk about mental wellness as opposed to mental illness. So what we are reaching for is for the people that we support to reach mental wellness. And the World Health Organization identifies that as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stressors of life, because there's always going to be stress in life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Mental wellness. And then there's trauma. Psychological or psychiatric trauma is an experience, please listen carefully to this, is an experience that is emotionally painful, distressful, or shocking, and which may result in lasting mental and physical effects. Mental and physical effects. A noted researcher in this area has a book entitled The Body Keeps Score. It encodes in your body. Psychiatric trauma is essentially a normal response to an extreme event, a normal response to an extreme event. You aren't crazy. It involves the creation of emotional memories about the distressful event that are stored in structures deep within the brain. And then the last definition I'd like for you to keep in mind is trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care is an organizational structure, the church, mental health care, organizational structure and treatment framework that involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma. Before I throw it back to you, Cedric, I want to say again, responding as opposed to reacting. Down through the years, we've done a lot of reacting to the trauma that we see in our churches and very little responding.
Right. I thank you for starting with that that definition of mental wellness from the World Health Organization, and I'm also glad that further down on the page they are working on redefining what mental wellness means, because part of that, there's a part of that original definition that jumps out for me, and it is this sense of what is normal.
Mhm.
This sense, so going back to the definition, a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life. And you made emphasis on that word normal as you were introducing that definition. But when I think about the world in which we live now, COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID,
Right.
racism, white supremacy, all of these traumatic events, none of this is normal.
Let me change that to normative as opposed to normal.
Sure.
So more of a scientific normative as opposed to normal. But
Sure.
go
But
ahead.
again, I'm glad that they are they're looking at this definition and coming up with a new, more nuanced, better definition for what mental wellness really means.
Mhm. And go ahead. You had something to say, Dr. Bridgman?
No, I actually wanted you, because I like problematizing the word normal. Here's why. Because what I'm capable of, my bandwidth for stress may be very different from someone who is managing bipolar or post-traumatic stress, right? So my bandwidth is different. I suffer from anxiety. There have been times when I couldn't get on a plane and I was scheduled to go present a paper. I think about when I was supposed to go to Canada, and I literally that morning, I just could not. I did everything I could to get on, and I beat myself up for, quote, not being able to. You know what I'm saying? But that was normal for me, suffering anxiety in that moment. And I didn't have a way of processing that at the time, but I had a good counselor at the time who helped me say, your body said no, go to bed. And so I really want us to talk about the way that we have been taught to ignore the warnings our bodies, our hearts, our minds give us, and how we've been told to perform no matter what. You know, no matter what we're going through, no matter what we're feeling, we're still supposed to perform.
And especially for those of us in ministry, it's you put on the robe and you step up to the pulpit, and you don't acknowledge that just before you stepped up to the pulpit, you were back there in your office still trying to deal with this. Maybe it was a manic episode, or maybe it was a depressive episode that you don't really know what triggered it yet. You don't know if it was the coffee as you were walking through the break room coming to your office in the church. You don't know what triggered it, but you got to step up on that podium and you've got to put on that face.
Right. Paul Laurence Dunbar. We wear the mask.
We wear the mask.
The last stanza of that poem. We smile, but oh, great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile, but let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. And I always think about, so as I'm doing this work, as I'm talking to our church and our communities, that's part of our reality, that we have been taught and trained and conditioned by the world in which we live, the community that we live, the country, with all of its flaws and all of its pressure for consumerism and all these things, to wear this mask that makes it look like we're always okay, that we always have to be on. And just thinking about the damage that we do to our own selves by having to be on, or feeling like we have to be on all the time. It's just astronomical.
And
Cedric,
hurt
we
people
forget.
hurt people. And
Hurt people hurt people.
Exactly.
So we're damaged, feeling out of sort. And oftentimes, like I'm going to say, I'm not a pastor right now, but I was for 27 years. There are people on the bench that you could call and say, listen, I'm going to need you to preach. We used to tell our preachers, you need to be ready to preach at the drop of a dime. You know, like
I remember.
my dad used to say, right,
I
you better have
remember.
a sermon in your pocket. And part of that is, if something happens, somebody needs to be able to step up and say a word. I remember a senior pastor said to me that his mama had died. And one of the elders in the church said to him, he said to the elder, he said, I don't know if I can do it this today, man. And the man said, that's why we pay you. I'm like, okay, we are doing a bad job of training people to the community of care. If your answer to my mama died is, but I paid you to preach this morning. We have to build better communities of faith, I think, around this.
Absolutely.
Community. In response to what you were saying, Cedric, I think we forget that we have this treasure in earthen clay. We forget that we're in earthen vessels, and that those earthen vessels need to be taken. We need to care for those earthen vessels, right? I always say, when I was teaching at university, I would say to my students, remember, when you start to practice social work, that every clinician needs a clinician, every therapist needs a therapist, every pastor needs a pastor.
And I tell my students, every pastor needs at least 2 therapists,
Right.
a massage therapist and a talk therapist, and they should not be the same person.
Right. Well, Dr. Valerie, you said something earlier about how you were internalizing and managing the stresses that you were dealing with at a particular time. And I think about how all of us handle, manage, internalize different stressors, different traumas. All of us handle them in different ways, right? So I'm looking for, you know, in my preaching and teaching, I'm looking for possible indications of mental health concerns, mental wellness concerns in the biblical text. And we're talking about trauma tonight. So the first place I go is Job, right? And I just preached this past Sunday that Job was not in this alone. He had a wife. And the losses that Job experienced, his wife experienced those same traumas.
Correct.
Those same
And
losses,
they manage them differently.
and they managed them differently. Job's response was, blessed, I came into this world with nothing. I'm leaving with nothing. Blessed, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. His wife's response was,
Curse
do you
God and
still
die.
maintain your integrity? Curse God and die.
Yeah.
It's the same stuff. And we give her such a bad rap when she's just managing it the best way that she can.
It's interesting you
She
say
lost
that.
the same children.
She lost the same children. She
Right.
lost the same financial blessings.
Right.
The other
And
passage
also, if you're reading Job, if you read the whole book of Job, he ain't that righteous.
Right. Right.
That's
Yeah,
why when I tell people, oh no, actually read Job. And at the end, when God says everything Job said about me is right, Job said some pretty harsh things about
Right.
God.
I wanted to point out another passage about where people handle things differently and we give the other person a bad rap, and that's Ruth and Orpah. So Ruth goes on and she goes with her mother-in-law Naomi because that's safe. But then Orpah also is like, you know, I've got to be someplace that's comfortable. This is safe for me. So it wasn't that Orpah was choosing her pagan gods necessarily. It was that Orpah needed to have a safe space.
She returned to her mother's house, the Bible says.
Right.
Right.
You
Can
know,
we
and
talk
so-
about Elijah too? Can we talk about Elijah?
Yeah, Elijah's running from Jezebel, right? You know, first,
And for good reason, by the way, she is
Right.
threatening him
She is
Right.
out to get her.
running from Jezebel,
and has the power to do so.
Right.
right, had the power to do so. Finally, you know, he gets to the juniper tree and God says to him, sit your butt down and go to sleep.
Go to sleep.
Go to sleep. Just go to sleep. And then he wakes him up, gives him some angel food. Oh, well, he has angels feed him, gives him some angel food, and then he says, go back to
Go back
sleep.
to sleep.
Go back to sleep.
How many times have I said to a patient, you know, you really need to just sleep, rest, get some rest, and then you can deal with this more effectively.
Right. Right. And just thinking about just general self-care, get an appropriate amount of sleep. Stop thinking that you can survive on 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. That is not normal. That is not healthy. I mean, and nobody, and it's not the same across the board where we say, well, you have to get 8 hours of sleep every night. Well, no, but 6 to 9, if you're cutting yourself short, you can't be all that you're supposed to be.
Listen, just 4% of dehydration and your brain is fuzzy, you're foggy, you can't think, you start feeling confused. 4% of dehydration, 4%. So even our ability to comprehend what we're going through, to even make assessments, are tied to all these bodily concerns, which is one of the things we said we wanted to talk about, is the way that people talk about mental health as if it's somehow outside of the body. So say more about that, y'all.
I remember once, Cedric, I was here at a conference here in Atlanta, several churches, and I think it was Emory or someone had put on a conference and that brought in mental health panelists. And I was telling my story about managing bipolar disorder, and I said to the pastors, I believe in deliverance, and I absolutely believe in deliverance. I have laid my hands on people and I have seen them delivered. I have literally laid, and my friend may actually be on this call. I've laid my hand on a child who was clinically dead and seen that child come to life. I believe in the laying on of hands. But you know what? Sometimes I need that little pink pill in my medicine cabinet
Mine's white.
because my body
Or blue.
needs to have that chemical to help balance the chemistry that's off balance.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I tell people, I don't know if I can, my son is a chemical engineer, and I tell people that if God didn't believe in medicine, he wouldn't have gifted my child the skill to be on my child was actually on the team that developed the medication that I use for mood stabilization.
Wow. Yeah.
You're talking right. Which brings me, you said, I believe in deliverance. I think somebody on Facebook told, that when we talk about mental health, those of you who are chatting, make sure you're chatting to everyone if you're on the webinar. I just want to say that again. When you talk about deliverance, immediately it made me think about how people think mental illness, and I'm going to use the word illness. I know we're talking about wellness, is demonic. So
Demonic.
can we talk about that?
Yeah. Cedric, I'll let you lead up because I've got so much to say about that.
So I start this conversation that I'm having with people. First of all, do I believe in demonic? Do I believe in spirits? Do I believe in demonic possession? Absolutely. Right. So, but when I look at like Mark chapter 5, the demoniac in the graveyard.
He's got my scripture, Valerie. Go ahead, Cedric.
This is paranoid schizophrenia. I mean, and early first century Palestine is trying to do their best to name what this is. They are under occupation. They are experiencing all manner of trauma, and out comes this man from the grave. He's living in places he has no business living in. He's
Homeless.
He's homeless.
Homeless.
He don't have clothing.
He doesn't have clothes. He's harming himself. And not only is he hearing voices, but the voices are speaking for him.
Right.
Was he being possessed? Probably, but that's their best way to explain what's going on with him. Or the boy whose daddy took him to the disciples to have the demon cast out of him because since
He
his
was
childhood,
epileptic.
he was epileptic.
Let's go back to the demoniac because I want to point something out there from a mental health perspective. So there could have been two things going on there because we know the pigs went over the hill. So there could have been two things going on there. However, here's what happens. So once he is delivered, he says to Jesus, I'm going to follow you. But Jesus does a thing that a very good therapist would do. One of the things that I would have taught a student in my clinical classes, he says to him, no, go home. Go home and be around those people who can nurture you.
Right.
And he says, tell what good things I've done. So that's the other thing we do as therapists, right? Sometimes we say, it's really good to rehearse for yourself the affirming things, the empowering things that have happened to you. So Jesus says, hey, no, don't come back out here where you can be exposed to more trauma. You're too raw right now. You're too newly delivered right now. No, go home.
So
Go
that is
home and
a
get some care.
trauma-informed reading of that text, right? So just like what we just did with the Elijah text, that's a trauma-informed reading of that text. You need community where it's safe, where you can be surrounded by, because I think oftentimes I've heard people say he didn't want to go back to the people that put him out community. I'm like, no, he was a cutter. He was, all the stuff, like, let me just say, as someone who knows people with mental health concerns personally, my own and familiar, it's hard to be in relationship with the illness, right? And so oftentimes those of us who are preachers or those of us who are working with people who are not medicated, who refuse that kind of care, don't know how to be with people.
Right.
I'm talking for myself, right? Because you can't, it's hard to be in relationship with the disease, because oftentimes someone who is not managing the disease, that's all you are, is in relationship with the disease,
Right.
whether it's alcoholism, whether it's bipolar, whatever it is, anxiety, whatever it is. I can remember somebody saying to me, I was walking with a woman one time, untreated, when I was untreated, and she just started saying to me, "You're talking angrily, you're walking fast." She was describing my symptoms. And, and I was like, oh, I need to go back to the doctor, because she was telling me without saying. But that was, I think, care.
Yes.
That was soul care in that.
Yes. Yeah, I have a couple of friends, as well as my husband is one who they can tell if I am escalating, because sometimes the medication needs to be adjusted, right? And they can tell sometimes before I can,
Right.
when I've started to escalate. And I need those kind of people in my life.
Right.
And when I was on, staff with you guys, Valerie, remember when we were in Austin?
Mhm.
You guys were able to kind of pull me aside and say,
Yeah,
they
I mean,
didn't-
my response would be-
they didn't kick me out of ministry. Now, now I've been in a couple of churches that when I began to escalate, they didn't know what it was. And so they sat me down or silenced me or whatever the other
called it
rituals are
demonic or
that they had. But when I was at Bana, they knew exactly what it was. And it was, Pamela, you really should go to the doctor.
and let me just be real clear. That was because I had been trained in that as a chaplain. I did my residency at a mental health hospital. And so I had to do all of DSM 4 and 5 reading. So I recognize it. I probably had enough trauma and enough mental health diagnosis to be dangerous, but not particularly helpful.
Well, I'm glad you guys
That's why I
treated me
stay in my
well.
lane. That's why I'm.
But what I'm trying to point to the preachers here, because we are going to do a Q&A here in a few minutes, which is that, in about 30 minutes, is that it helped me to read, to learn, to come, to get, because I wanted to be the kind of pastor to everybody, and not just to the people that people think are, quote, easy to pastor. I don't even know what that means, because I pastored for 27 years, and trust me, all of us can be a special case. But you get what I'm saying there. So
Can we segue to
something about
else?
that, Cedric.
I wanted to talk about Cedric, if you would, and that as well. But one of the things that I've experienced over the years as well is preachers making statements from the pulpit that were very harmful. And then let me give you an example. I shared this with Dion and Valerie. I was visiting a church and the pastor had an altar call. Again, you need to know that I have, I'm one of the tongue talkers. I'm Pentecostal. I believe in the gifts of the Spirit. I operate in the word of knowledge. I operate in prophecy.
Shando.
So this pastor may really have had a word of knowledge, and that's fine. However, he goes down, lays his hand on this woman, and begins to say out loud, well, and she had also confided to him why she was coming to the altar. Lay and say out loud what was going on. And I'm on the verge of tears right now. I remember thinking to myself, Cedric, I hope that woman has a good therapist. And I hope she goes to that therapist tomorrow. Please talk about that, Cedric.
I'm dumbfounded.
Face, Cedric, I just need to say that. Your face said what we all were feeling. Yeah. And the first time I heard that story, your face said it all. I'm sorry, Dr. Valerie, I had to say it because we're all feeling it. Please talk about it. And thank
Please talk
you,
about it. 'Cause
Pamela, for sharing it.
I
Can
was
we-
like,
Can
I
we get
hope
his
she
license?
has a
Can we pull-
therapist.
Can we pull his license? I mean, that's just a no. That's just a no.
malpractice.
That is, it was, he violated confidentiality. He put, and I actually, so I'm familiar with this story because I watched the video of the conversation before this. But just thinking about what confidentiality he broke and thinking about what danger he put that woman in. Can we pull his license? Can we please? We wouldn't out anybody in that way that came to us and said in confidence, my husband is having an affair.
Although people have.
People have done that.
I've seen preachers do some pretty horrible things from the pulpit, which are damaging and harmful to people who are trying to be whole. And if as a pastor, and a lot of times people say, well, I was being prophetic as opposed to priestly. I'm like, but the priestly is prophetic and the prophetic is priestly. So what you don't do is more harm in the name of, quote, calling
Prophetic.
things out. You just don't. Today is 45 years in ministry for me. So I care deeply about this, right? You know, yes, we have this treasure, we have this ministry in earthen vessels, and we minister to earthen vessels.
Yes.
It is our duty not to do no harm. Should be the first order for everybody. Right. Do no harm.
What happened to the scripture, love one another? What happened to that one?
Or do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Do unto others. And I just kind of need to go back to my Pentecostal ministers here on the webinar with us. Remember, yes, you may get a prophetic word, you may get a word of knowledge, but Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians that you can actually hold that. You don't have to release.
You actually don't have to say everything that comes up don't have to come out.
That's what my mama used to say. Everything that comes up doesn't have to come out.
In that moment.
Where's the desiring of the more perfect gifts?
Right.
Yes.
The more perfect gift, which is love. And where's the intercessory work of the pastor? Because that yes. Sometimes God shows us things. I know this to be true. Sometimes God shows us things for us to pray about it, not even for us to even react on it in that moment. Sometimes we're being called to a season of prayer and God will show you something. I know this to be true. God will show you something and it will help you see kind of a larger picture. Oh, that's why this is going on. And then you get to see dynamics between people as a pastor. You know this as a counselor, Pamela. You've never been a senior pastor, but you know what it is to when you get a bigger picture. That's why you call in some family members sometimes.
Yes.
With your people. You're like, okay, I need another piece. You're not giving me everything I need to know. Right. And sometimes the Spirit will show you something so you have that other piece, not so you can be a busybody about it, not so you can put people's work, life out on Front Street.
Can I identify one more thing, since we have only about 15 more minutes before we go to Q&A? I want to talk about, and I'm going to use a particular passage to talk about it because I've seen this really harm people sitting in a congregation. So the passage where Absalom's sister Tamar, the daughter of David, gets raped by her half-brother Amnon. I've seen this preached several times and seen reactions in the congregation that I was like, that further damaged them. But this one particular time, I had actually been working with a person, and she was a member of the congregation. a guest preacher came in, preached from that passage. A female preacher preached from that passage. And who did she blame for that situation? Did she
Tamar.
blame Amnon? She blamed Tamar. Tamar should never have gone into Amnon's room. Never mind the fact that the king, who happened to be her father, sent her into that room. Never mind that she made an outcry and said, "Don't do this to me," and then followed the law when she left the room and tore her garments. Never mind that her brother Absalom did what a lot of people do with victims of that kind of trauma and tell them to keep silence. He said, "Don't talk about it. After all, this is your brother." And one of the saddest scriptures to me is, "And she remained desolate in the house of her brother." I saw women who were on the verge of being willing to tell their story so that they could get help. Hear that woman blame Tamar, and I'm not going to tell. I'm not going to get the help I need, because after all, I have just been told that it was my fault.
The emotional damage that is. Just the
And just this whole
and the
idea
spiritual
of,
damage. Let's be clear. That is spiritual malpractice. Let's call it that.
right. I mean, and this whole idea of victim blaming on in so many areas of our lives.
Bathsheba.
Right. I mean, when we know clearly no woman had the agency to say no to the king.
Right.
Yeah, you know, you can't say no to the king or you'll die. That was not consensual. That was abuse of power. That was rape.
Right. It's
But
abuse
So
of
we're
power and
talking
therefore
about
rape.
preaching and trauma. Talk to me about how trauma-informed preaching, how is that not?
The first place you have to start is considering. So as with Woman Preach and all of the workshops that we sponsor, one of the first things that we do is learn how to interrogate the text. Who's the real victim here? Who is the voice of the silenced in this text? Who has no power? Who has all power? Who's abusing the power? And when you Oprah Hendricks says that we have to learn how to preach from the bottom, right? So that as we come up through this piece of interrogating the text, trauma-informed preaching has to value the victim, has to give affirmation to the victim and recognize the violence that's been done to the victim in the name of whatever it is that we claim in the name of.
Right.
Yeah, I think, so I would add to that, amen. I would add to that, you know, who's not in the room? Like, you know, and therefore need a voice, right? And a lot of times I think preachers, particularly we're talking about mental health here, I think a lot of times we're so busy, I'm gonna say we because I'm a preacher, so busy going for the holler and the whoop and the amen, that we don't even pay attention to who may be hurt by what we're saying.
Right.
Because the holler and the hoop kind of overshadows the person who's sitting there shaking from what we just said.
It overshadows the need to do the real work.
Right.
Right.
Right. So, okay, I want you to talk about David at Ziklag, because we said we were going to talk about David at Ziklag. I'm watching the clock, but let's talk about here is the powerful who abused his power in one place, but what happens to him at Ziklag?
So they're in
1 Samuel 30, for
1
those
Samuel
of you
30.
who don't know.
1 Samuel 30, they're in battle against the Amalekites and things have not gone well. The Amalekites have come in, they have stolen animals, they've stolen women, they've stolen children. David is leading his army. His army is about to stone him because he's been the one who has led them into all of these losses. And David is moved to the point where, and again, thank you for this pulling my coattail on this. We run to, and David encouraged himself in the Lord, but we skip over before he was encouraging himself
wept.
in the Lord, he was weeping over all that was going on. So David, in a real sense, experiences this trauma. So he goes to God, and he prays to God, am I supposed to pursue? Will I overtake them? And God tells him that you surely will pursue and overtake them. And so part of my work has been around mental health. I've been sponsoring a mental health conference for the past 5 years. And it's called the Ziklag Conference. And so it's based on that story, as we think about how after David weeps and mourns, what does David have to do to encourage his men? What does he have to do to regain his own strength and then go in and recover all that had been stolen from him? So we rush to, we rush to David encourage himself. We rush to the song of, I'm taking everything back the devil stole from me, all of that. But that's kind of Ziklag in a nutshell.
Yeah, it makes me think of Fred Craddock used to say, may he rest in peace. He was a great preacher in the Disciples of Christ tradition, right? And a great storyteller. But Fred Craddock used to say, the preacher sometimes must preach when, and he used the word when he doesn't believe, and the community has to hold his unbelief until he believes again.
Wow.
And then he went on to say, that's when you're depressed, that's when you're sad, that's when you have been disappointed, when you have expected God to do something for you and God did not come through in the way you wanted God to come through. And because we have all these tropey kind of cliche things we say, we don't want to deal with our disappointment with God. And we don't have a place for the people to be disappointed with God. But the whole of Lamentations is about being disappointed with God.
Yes.
The whole of Jeremiah is about being disappointed with God. Jeremiah accuses God of abuse, in Jeremiah 20, so it's 7 rather. So my point here is that we don't know how to be honest with God. And therefore, it's very hard for us to be honest with ourselves when we are struggling emotionally, when we're struggling spiritually, when we're struggling mentally.
Yeah, and that's a hard place to preach from, because again, how do you preach from a place of what are you going to do when God is the one who seems to be the abuser? But it can be done, but it takes doing the work.
Yeah.
Doing the work, Cedric, doing the work.
Also, I think I want y'all to talk about preachers who have not thought about this at all and what kind of resources they need to gather around themselves to want to become a trauma-informed or health-informed preacher, to how to provide resources. Because one of the things I really want preachers to know is you don't have to know it all. You just have to know people who know stuff. Like, you need to be able to make referrals. Like, this whole notion that I, as the pastor, needed to provide all of the counseling. No, I saw myself, particularly if I could discern that there was a mental health issue beyond, a spiritual care thing that I needed. I needed to have a reference sheet of people I had tested, people I had talked to myself.
And that's what I was about to say, Valerie.
It wasn't just people that somebody told me about, unless it was somebody I trusted. If Cedric said to me, okay, this person is really qualified, then I don't need to vet them because I trust you. But talk about.
Well, one of the things that you just said, which I have appreciated. I've had pastors here in the area, and I don't know how they would found out about me initially, but would actually ask me to come in and have a conversation with me, or have come over to my office to have a conversation with me to make sure that I was someone to whom they wanted to refer people that they pastor. So I'm fortunate that I get quite a few referrals from pastors in the area and keep a resource list that I can also give to them if, if I am booked out, for weeks and they need to get someone in sooner. But I think every pastor also needs to make sure that they develop a resource list that in their city.
Yeah. It could
And
start by
the
pastor
church
herself.
that I was just
It could start by
at,
the pastor herself having a counselor.
yeah, I was going to recommend this too. The church that I was formerly a member of had developed a resource of people within the congregation. So he had a section. There were a number of us who were counselors, and so a resource of your congregation members as well.
Right. We're actually in the process of doing just what you said. We did several surveys when I first came on, and found out what people's certifications were, what their careers were, what they were retired from. And so we're pulling together all of those that have work in psychology, work in social work, counseling, therapy. We're pulling those together so that our congregation can know these are the people within that you can go to when you need assistance. We're also working on making sure that people understand what kind of benefits they have through their job, their employer's EAP program.
Yes.
And so there's always, the caseload is heavy right now with a lot of people. And so there's a lot of backlog and a long wait.
Yeah.
That's because we're in a communal trauma right now.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm 3 weeks out on my own personal calendar. I was going to recommend 2, and my thought just slipped. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Cedric, we interrupted you.
No, that was pretty much it. That was the end of that.
Yeah. So
Oh, it was something you said, Valerie, about a continuing education. So as a clinical social worker, I have to get continuing education. As a pastor, you may not have to have clinical pastoral education, but if you can get some extra courses, I'd highly recommend that you do
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you are in a situation where you can do it extended clinical pastoral education, which means that you can do it while you're working, I would recommend that as well. Because I just think the work that you have to do in CPE, I saw Alice Hernandez is on here. And Alice, just wave at me. I just know that it's important to know, she's saying, and we definitely need students right now. Yay for CPE, all the people kicking in right now. That pastors, first of all, the thing about CPE is you get to know yourself first and foremost, and that excavating of the self, what your own limits are, where you need to grow, or what you need to do to sustain your own health. And by health, I'm including all of your health. I know we're talking mental health because it's Mental Health Awareness Month, but I'm really bothered by the way that we treat mental health as if it's not the whole health of us, that we do this work. And there's some denominations that require you to do CEUs and do training, so boundary work and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm saying take some of your CEUs and get some trauma information.
I agree.
Go to something that you wouldn't normally go to that will help you and maybe even reshape your preaching. Woman Preach will help with that part, I can tell you that. But beyond that, so that you become deeply aware of yourself as much as everyone else. And William, I agree with you that I think CPE should be required for people who work in congregational settings. It just is not. But yeah, this work that we have to do both on ourselves so that we don't harm people, and also the work of gathering resources. So I would ask y'all before we take this quick break and then come back for Q&A. And if they don't have questions, we got plenty of stuff we can continue to talk about. What resources would you offer people, and can you put them in the chat for us? If you have particular, you said The Body Keeps the Score, so I put that in the chat. I think that's a great book. You know, almost anything by Brene Brown helps.
I was about to say Brene Brown,
Just because
but particularly the one I have bought so many copies of The Gifts of Imperfection that I should get a commission off of it. But
Right.
The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown.
right.
Let me put it in the chat.
Can those of you who just put it in the host and
Oh.
panelists, so I'm gonna call your name so you can just repeat it.
My bad. That was me.
Okay, and Margaret, will you chat to everyone and not just to the host and panelists? Put those Spirit in Session by Russell Jones.
Oh,
Do you
thank
see
you,
how that-
Will.
Yeah,
So I put in the chat Grace for the Afflicted by Matthew Stafford. That informed a lot of the work that I did as I was working on my D-Man project. Because what Stafford does is he basically takes the DSM-5 and clinically diagnoses 25 characters.
Paul,
Yeah,
David,
Nebuchadnezzar,
Nebuchadnezzar.
Saul, Samson. Gosh,
wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be helpful for everybody. Okay, everybody, you know, first of all, the three of us could go on forever. We're going to take a quick break. Don't leave us. Reverend Dion, will you come on and greet us? We're going to go off camera I'll mute while you talk. And then we're going to come back and go with the Q&As. If you have questions, look down at the bottom of your Zoom, and in the Q&A, write your question. And while you're talking, Reverend Dion, I'm going to look up on Facebook to see if there are questions.
So I am purposely off camera because I joining this conversation with these group of prophetic preachers. We can go on and on and on, but I just want to thank you and to say this is the work that goes into preparing trauma-informed reading of text. I mean, to just sit here and talk about the text, and this is what we do at Women Preach. It's the intentional interrogation of text. And just as it was said, that we need community to manage our mental health. I too am not just the practitioner and the pastor of it, but I am a consumer as well. My pill is a blue pill, I just want to say. But we also need, just as we need community to manage our mental health care, we also need community to keep this kind of transparent and prophetic and life-giving work going. So Women Preach is that community. And so we are doing this good and sacred work of training preachers, not just to find and focus their voice, but also to help public speakers who are not preachers do the same thing. This is the kind of preaching that helps everybody hear the gospel and imagine a world where we are loved and valued and treated with dignity, respect, and that we see. Giving is a part of that sacred work. And so it helps resource this work. I know sometimes we think that this is not something that's that you know, we can just, this is just managed and we don't have to, you know, it comes naturally. But we need people to give and to give into it. Make the decision that you want to support this kind of life-giving work. On the screen, you'll see the ways in which you're able to give. We have two giving platforms, Givelify and PayPal. And we need for you to make a decision that you want to journey with us in this kind of work and be a part of that community that does this work. And what we need for you to do, especially in PayPal, is for you to give us your complete contact information, especially your updated email address. And the reason we do that is because we want to say thank you. We want to thank you for being a part of Women Preach Nation, but we also want to make sure that you continue to stay connected to us and doing this work. This is the sacred imperative kind of work that we need to keep on going. I know if you have not been helped by this conversation, I know I have. This is the work. At the beginning, I think it was you, Reverend Pamela, who said, or one of you said, hurt people, hurt people. We've heard that before. But giving and sowing the seed here and Women Preach helps us to transform that, to heal people. And that's what we need. So make the decision to give. Some of us are already givers, and we want to say thank you to you, those of you. And if you're in online now and you're a recurring giver already, drop it in the chat and let us know that you already give to Women Preach. If Women Preach has impacted you in any way, just make a decision to make a gift tonight. And so we need you to keep this life-giving work going. Ashe. Pastor Carla, Dean of JLPA, coming up. So we, again, want to say thank you to our panelists, and we want to say thank you to the Women Preach Nation who already gives to us. Giving is a part of this work that keeps it going. So thank you for being the givers that are already giving, and thank you for those who will be giving tonight. Go on, get your phones out. Make sure that you do PayPal, Givelify, stay connected. And we want to say thank you for being part of Women Preach Nation and help us keep doing what we do. Stopping out bad preaching, one preacher at a time. Ashe.
Stomping out bad preaching, one preacher at a time. Okay, Tierney, would you see if you can find Alice Hernandez and make her a panelist real quick for this first question, because she's the one I want to ask this question to. Alice, can you get on? Can you type in the chat if you're willing to be on? There you are. Hey, Alice. The question has come up, and I'm asking you because of your work with CPE. Can you recommend any CPE programs for working adults?
Sure. Yeah, definitely an extended unit.
Okay, first of all, tell people who you are and what you do.
Sure.
The Reverend Alice Hernandez is back in Texas now, but go ahead.
So I'm at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, and I've been here about 2.5 years. And so an extended unit of CPE is going to be great for pastors, great for people who are already working full time, because an extended unit is going to be about 20 hours a week. And you're going to do education for about 5 hours a week. And then the other 15 hours, you're going to do clinical work where you're going to see patients. Some CPE centers will actually let you do your clinical hours in your congregation, but pretty much all of them want you to do some clinical hours so that you can get exposure to bedside ministry. So a unit, now here's the thing, a lot of extended units don't pay. Now, that's the bad part. That's the thing that the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education is trying to convince CPE centers to do better, because that's hard on people to ask them to commit to 17 weeks part-time. It's great education, but at the same time, it's hard for people. Now, I'm fortunate at my center, we do pay all of our students. We pay about $15 an hour for the part-time extended unit, which again, it's about 17 weeks. And then we pay our summer students as well, but a lot of CPE centers don't pay for those extended or summer internships.
And the summer intern is 4 months?
It's 12 weeks. So
12
usually
weeks.
like our
So
summer
it's 3
students are
months.
going to start June 6th and they'll graduate August 12th. So a summer unit is going to be about 12 weeks.
Right.
An extended unit is going to be about 17.
Right. Okay. And that's true. Don't go anywhere, Alice. And that's true in CPE. Where I don't know where the person is that asked that question, but then I would say wherever you live, you can check at the local hospital
Yep.
and have a conversation with the local CPE director, and they will help you.
Yep,
Okay, thank you, Alice. I appreciate you
welcome.
coming on. Thanks.
of course, I got mini me, gotta make an
I know,
appearance.
I love her. Hi, baby girl. We love the babies. So,
All right, good to see you.
and she is definitely a mini me. She's looking more and more like her mama. All right, thank you. Somebody said if you're in Chicago, Sankofa is an African-American focused online CPE program, and I know it's certified. So there you go. My point is, if you want to
Yeah.
know, if you want to get on,
Thank
you can find them.
Yeah, people, I can put my email in the chat if people want to contact me, and I can direct them to people. Yeah, Danielle Buhuro is the CP person there in Chicago.
Right. Go ahead and put your email in the chat, and those of you who are online, there it is, and Tierney will put it on the Facebook page for you. Okay, speak more to the notion of God being an abuser. So how y'all want to go? Rock and roll.
Cedric, and I believe the word he said was when God appears as the abuser.
I did say appears. Uh, so again, going back to, though, thinking about how Jeremiah didn't want to do what God was calling him to do. And God forces, so I'm thinking about the times that God appears to force people to do things against their will, and punish them with threats of death. I'm trying to think of a specific example.
Well, I mean, so here's what I would say about it is it is clear in Hosea that the way the prophet tells that story, God is abusive. If you pull somebody, if you strip somebody naked in the public square and march them in front of who you think is their lovers, that's abusive language. And the fact that they used, and he attributes that to the deity. And the fact that they use that kind of language means that they thought that that was okay for men to do to their wives.
Right.
So,
and then as you say that, I'm thinking about how in the book of Judges, how the Benjamites acquired wives.
right.
Yeah.
And so this also speaks to the way that people often say, well, the Lord said, and Pamela and I can talk about this is like, let's concede God speaks. Now let's talk about what you just said, God said. We're gonna concede God speaks. Now let's talk about that. Okay, what kind of organizations or conferences there might be for youth leaders? I think this is such an important thing. I don't have an answer for this, but Tierney, maybe this is something that we can maybe do a deep dive in and post later on our Instagram or on our Twitter. But if anybody has any resources for helping with the mental health of youth and children, this would be important. Let me just say, I know personally several teenagers who struggled this past 2 years, particularly in the time when you're supposed to be socializing and the pandemic shut down, and people who, I know, young woman who began cutting and, suicidal ideations, drinking, all the kinds of things people do to self-medicate and or end the pain and hurt. So I do think we need to think about what kind of resources do you provide for youth. Let me just say one of the biggest you provide as a minister is a caring presence and a listening ear without an answering mouth. Okay, that's my answer. So Shakima, okay, Shakima's giving me some answers over on Facebook. I got to go find it though. And Shakima does youth. She specifically does work with youth, so that's really great. As soon as she gives me that on Facebook, I will put that in the chat over here. So Reverend Dion's last name, by the way, is Boissiere, Boissiere, for the person who asked. Okay, what
I
were you
was just
gonna
going to
say, Cedric?
suggest, offer too, that there's a training, there is mental health first aid that helps people not diagnose. The purpose is not to be able to diagnose, but to be able to understand, empathize, and walk people through a process of seeking help when they need it. And a big component of that is being able to listen non-judgmentally, which people who are dealing with mental health concerns need. They don't need more judgment, more condemnation. They need a listening ear.
I would also recommend that family, friends of individuals, whether they are youth or adults, would seek out NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness, and join that organization and attend those meetings. They're very helpful. It's people who are themselves, supporting people with mental illness. And they also have an aspect of that where the individuals who are managing mental illness can provide peer support as well.
And the NAMI website has all, I mean, they have lots of resources on their website.
Would you put the website in the chat? Nakisha said that the Steve Fund is an organization focused on youth mental health. So that's great. Yeah, great. And also this work we're doing right now where you reach out to community for support, that's good. That's good modeling. Okay, is there a guide for a church who wants to start a mental health center or competent mental health ministry within the church? Before they answer, Cynthia, I'm gonna say, call Cedric, he's good at that, or call Pamela, who also does consultation with churches. Both of them are really good. I know there are other people, but I'm gonna recommend the two people that have helped us right now. Go ahead.
One of the things I'm working with our current congregation is training them to be a what we call a mental wellness center, a place where the church just sort of provides maybe once a month where people can come gather, get mental health information, maybe pamphlets or those kinds of things, and just kind of have a place to come and gather. But you also train your like I'm with an AME church right now, so you train the stewards, certain of the stewards, to be able to recognize certain signs and symptoms and know how to then refer to the pastor, and that kind of thing. So you would do some training with those lay people in your congregation as well.
We're working on, just raising awareness in our congregation.
Yeah.
And so one piece that we've added to our Sunday morning worship, we do a monthly mental health moment. And those people that we identified in the congregation as social workers or therapists or counselors, we give them, and again, it's a start, right? That we give them 5 to 7 minutes to say just a brief, here's this information in this area of mental health, mental wellness. We want you to be aware, and we are available for you to get more information if you want it.
Right.
Yeah, and if you have professionals in your congregation, and I would say to you, pastors, it must be done by a licensed professional. But I've done a Sunday school class before. Like I've done a Beauty for Ashes, which was a trauma informed Sunday school class where, looking at those texts around and helping people who themselves were experiencing some kind of trauma. But it has to be someone who Yeah.
So I put Pamela's website in the chat, which is ahjcc.com, which is a healing journey, counseling and consultation. So she does work with organizations and churches around this very question, Cynthia and others who are asking that question. I just think, I think about how my pastor and when we were dealing with grief, called somebody who specializes in grief counseling. So we did the sermon, did the worship, and then did an aftercare moment after church with a meal, and had the professional continue the work. So I think there are a lot of ways to do it. I don't think you have to turn things completely upside down. Start little by little, you know. Right. Yeah. Keisha is asking about the online, and Alice, I would say reach out to Alice. Alice, put your email in there again, because what the Sankofa one is an online CPE. You're asking about that. And I think she also has some part-time part of that as well. So I want us to speak to this, someone who, and let me just say, I'm gonna answer this and then turn it over. Someone says, I'm 56-year-old woman who started therapy many years ago from severe childhood trauma, and it's still a struggle daily. Let me just say, I like the word Pamela has used several times, managing. She talks, my sister was in the Air Force and suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome from being in a war zone, and still manages that. So what I would say is, I manage my diabetes, and therefore I manage my mental health, and therefore I manage. My point here is, healing doesn't always look like, you know, somebody prayed for me, somebody laid hands on me, and then it's over. You know, sometimes it's, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff that comfort me. You know, that God is with us. Where can I flee from your spirit? If I make my bed in hell, you're there. If I go to the farthest part of the earth, which is a way of saying God is with us. And I think the thing that the church needs more than anything is a God is with us kind of theology.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we do, but that would help with our mental health care in the church.
You know,
Now,
the
y'all,
name of the name of my practice is A Healing Journey.
Bernie.
And when the Holy Spirit gave me that name, I actually was like, at first, in all honesty, I said, Lord, that sounds too new agey. But anyway, I'm just being honest. But I understand it. But because it is, it's a journey, and it's over time, and it's not a destination. So healing is not a destination.
Right.
It really isn't.
Keisha, I'm fine with you putting the UCC toolkit in the larger group, in the everyone group, partly because I know some of the people who helped design that, and I know they used professionals. So that's not a lay-led thing, the toolkit on caring for people with mental illness. So, and if there are other denominational resources that people know, drop those in the chat as well. Here's a really good question. What can we do for our leadership to help them assist with the structural care for pastors' mental health maintenance? So yeah, how you want to tackle that? I'm gonna start with you, Cedric, Pastor.
So ask the question one more time. I'm sorry.
What can we do for our leadership? This is a pastor asking.
Okay.
Especially the governing bodies to assist with the structural care for the pastor's mental health maintenance. Like, how do we help other leaders who are helping to govern the church, help structure care, Sabbaths for the pastor, whatever it may mean, to help mental health care for their pastor?
Right.
So that
So
the pastor can be long-term.
Right. So I'm thinking about, I mentioned earlier EAP programs for regular jobs. But where are those type of programs for pastors? As pastors so I'm very transparent with my congregation about my journey. And so I think even if we don't go the route of creating, I don't know, EAP programs, I think we go the route of creating safe spaces for pastors. I'm thinking about like our state missionary Congress or the PMBC, creating spaces within those organizations where pastors have safe space to share stories and testimonies. I think creating safe space goes a long way. I mean, that's a starting point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think about kind of the structure of, I actually do think it would help to have someone like Cedric or someone like Pamela come in and talk to your leaders about sort of the health of the congregation is the health of everybody in the congregation, including the leaders, right? We had someone, a couple of years ago, as somebody was saying, the biggest thing was Sabbath, sabbatical, Sabbath. But nobody was talking about how to help churches get ready. There were pastors who were afraid to go on Sabbath because people aren't going to give if the pastor is gone. But the health of the congregation includes, yes, the leaders. And so when I was a chaplain, a hospice chaplain, we were required, we had to take off every 6 weeks. We had to take off every 6 weeks because there's this thing called, what do you call it? Trauma that's not yours. What do you call it? Pamela, you're on mute.
Vicarious
trauma. And as a pastor, oftentimes you are experiencing vicarious trauma because you're hearing the confessions of people. You're showing up at hospitals. You're showing up I've shown up at car wrecks, because you get a call, you got to be on the side of the road with people, and so you're dealing with this vicarious trauma. And as a chaplain, they made us take time off. We had to have a counselor. We had to check out. And that, I think a lot of pastors don't do a good job of checking out. I mean, just taking a day off. And I mean, turning your phone off, can't nobody reach you. Somebody work it while you off that 24 hours. And I've had pastors say to me, but what if somebody dies? Well, they're going to be dead when you come back tomorrow. And you deal with it tomorrow.
And I think about sabbaticals too, like in the academy, right? So when I'm thinking about professors that take sabbaticals, a lot of them are doing some pretty heavy work during their sabbatical time. And if that's the case, then what's the point of taking the sabbatical? Is it really a sabbatical, or is it a time where I'm carving out where I can get more research done? And so from a church standpoint, is it really a sabbatical, or am I carving out some time where I can do some more church work without anybody bothering me?
Right. Which is not the same thing. I just put the resources from Shakima into the chat from over at Facebook for those of you. Yeah, I'm on sabbatical right now, and I just want to say I literally had to give myself, to be kind to myself for not, quote, being productive, not working. And yet rest is productivity because it's regenerative. It's regenerating you. It's setting you up to be okay. And we're not okay, people. We're not okay. We're just not okay.
Dr. Valerie, can I just, I turned back on my screen, and again, apologies for inserting myself here, but I wanted just to comment about the sabbatical. So Pastor Bennett, as you know, Dr. Valerie has been taking sabbaticals, and not just preparing the pastor, but we have had folks to come in to talk with the congregation. If there's any questions that the congregation may have, any of that, they come in to provide any answers for the congregation to help them understand and see why this is necessary for the pastor to experience, and how you can journey. So especially if he was working on a particular thing, he was going to the water to take time away. And so they had answers for us. They took Q&A, and they were there to journey with us if there were any questions that we had along the lines of his sabbatical, so that we were not inclined to reach out to pastor, to talk to them, so that they provided resources for the church so that the pastor could actually have the sabbatical. So that was built in as a structure. And so this is something that in pastoral care and counseling and training that is also done. I know that that Concord Baptist Church does that, and it's inbred into to their program, so pastors understand and know when they are going in and they accept a call and they're starting to serve, that this is a part within the structure for both the pastor and the people.
Okay, y'all, I hate that we're almost out of time. We got 3 minutes. So Pamela, last words. What would you want to say to the people who have gathered here? I just want to read something Carla wrote here, is that sadly, we will either get a break or be broken, and I'm not here for being broken. Y'all ain't gonna break me in the name of Jesus. That's not how this works. Okay, Pamela, last words.
Simply that I think it's extremely important that as individuals who are pouring into other individuals, that you're pouring in cleansing water and not water that is contaminated. In order to do so, it's important that you, first of all, take care of your own mental health, and then that you do trauma-informed preaching as well as pastoral care.
Thank you. Cedric, last words.
So I remember when I first told Dr. Valerie about my condition, about my illness. One of the things she told me, so I was going to work every day at this new job, and she told me that before you do anything else, turn your face to the sun. Turn your face to the sun. And then after you do that, make sure that at some point during the day, because I was working in a school, she said, make sure you go to the gym, to the gymnasium on your campus, and just walk for a minute. And I'm bringing that up in the area of self-care to remind us that we need to move. We need to connect with the sun. We need to connect with nature. We need to make sure we're drinking plenty of water, and just take care of yourselves.
Yeah, we cannot. I think about how often Jesus was not found when they were looking for him.
Wow.
How often he would disappear, and they'd be like, but we need him, and he's off somewhere praying or fishing and praying, but not being found.
Right.
And the people who think they gotta, or sleeping, but the people who think they gotta be found all the time, you better than Jesus. And all I'm saying is Jesus knew. There was one other question I want to acknowledge that I didn't get to, which is, I'm sorry, brother from Kenya. I don't know of resources on the continent, and I'm sorry I don't, but maybe you can check back on Facebook and somebody will put something in the chat over there. I want to thank each of you for coming tonight. As I said, we could probably go another 30 minutes. We all got scriptures running around in our head that we would want to unpack right now. And we got stories we could tell about our own health, mental, physical, emotional health, and those that we've worked through with other people. My telling Cedric to turn his face to the sun had to do with the fact that most Black people don't have enough of vitamin D. And and we are depressed because of it. I mean, that's how it shows up.
Right.
Dry skin and depression.
Yeah.
And so he didn't say, but I did say get you a therapist. He already had one. But but my point here is having somebody that you can say that to. I'm not well. It's not good. Today I'm not good. That in itself is healing. Somebody that you can say out loud, I'm not well. And they can hold that with you and hold you until you feel well again to get up. That is a gift. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the Woman Preach board for hosting this tonight. We're so thankful for you. Thank you, Reverend Pamela Bridgman, clinical counselor, and Reverend Dr. Cedric Jackson. Thank you all for your work in this area. I commend them to you if you're trying to figure out what to do with your church. I absolutely commend these people to you because they're good at what they do. And so thank you all for being here. We'll see you at the next Woman Preach thing. Don't forget to give, because your giving helps us do just what we're doing tonight. All right.
Ashe.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.